Today, my wife and I are visiting Colonial Williamsburg, an amazing living history museum in Virginia that tells the early part of America's enduring story. Come along with me and my wife as we explore a history buff's paradise. That's coming up next.
Still pretty period specific. So our barrels are 100% wrought iron. Everything on this rifle is wrought iron. That's working parts. All your hardware will be brass. But the only three parts on this entire rifle that are steel are the three springs. So you have your frizzen spring, your main spring is underneath, and your sear spring is underneath too. And so those are the only three parts in the entire rifle that are actually steel. Because in the 18th century, steel was about 3 times higher than iron was. And so, so we only use steel for springs, then we use wrought iron for everything else. And brass for hardware. Brass for all that. Yeah.
Would most people just make their own balls to shoot?
Yeah, so in the 18th century, and for us as well, every rifle we get done, we also make a bullet mold to go with it. And so that mold matches your whatever caliber it is. And so that way that customer has a mold to make his own balls. Yeah. Yeah. So, you bet.
So are there different types of guns that would be produced in a shop like this?
Yeah.
Or was it mainly just the rifle like you have on display there?
It was mainly the rifle. Yeah, it was mainly the rifle. Although we produced pistols as well, horse pistols and different pistols. And there would have been a few fowling pieces made, but the majority would have been rifles. So because that's what they were known for in this area, was for deer hunters. In the 18th century, you could have a gun, which was a shotgun, imported from England for £1. And, or you could have a rifle built here for £4. So it was a lot cheaper to have one imported than it was to have one built. So that's why your deer hunters would have been having rifles, because that was their job. They needed a very reliable and very accurate weapon for deer hunting. Whereas in the 18th century, every master of each household was required to have at least one firearm inside their house for self-defense. And so generally the father or husband or whoever, he would own at least one fowling piece. So that would have been your most common piece, is that top one in the household. Yeah, because you could have it imported for about £1, so it was a lot cheaper. And a lot of young men, by the time they were old enough to hold a weapon up to their face, they owned one as well. And a lot of young men participated in militia duties and things like that. And so when the revolution kicked off, that was a big thing for us, because a lot of young men had already been participating. They weren't highly trained by any means, but they kind of had a military mindset in a way, because they'd already been raised with their gun and also been raised in a militia type of atmosphere as well. And so, yeah. Most of your apprentices, so America, well, the colonies at the time, because we weren't really America yet until we won the revolution, but we were in a dire need for farmers. So about probably 90% of the population was actually farmers. And on those farms, you had guys that could do this kind of stuff. So they actually started making blacksmith shops, they started making gun shops and things like that. And guys on the farm would actually start doing their trade on the farms and things like that. So apprenticeship programs were for like young men that started around the age of 15, 16 years old typically. And by law, you were bound to that man. So whoever the master was, whether he was a master gunsmith, master blacksmith, whoever, you were bound to him until you were 21 years old. And so by law, your dad would actually go to court and sign you over to him. And he had to provide you with clothing, food, housing, and elementary education, teach you his trade, and take you to church as well. You worked at least 12 hours a day. So as long as it was daylight outside, you were working 6 days a week. There were no holidays, vacation, or retirement. You worked until you died. But your apprenticeship lasted until you were 21 years old. And so you were bound to that man until you were 21 years of age. And the only way out of that apprenticeship program is if the master was not fulfilling his duties. So if he didn't provide you with an education or something like that, you could tell your dad, and your dad would have to go to court, and he could get you out of it. But by law, you were bound to it. Yeah. So pretty interesting. Yeah.
So this is the start of the barrel.
Yep. In the 18th century, they didn't have a way or a means of drilling a hole through something yet, like a barrel. And so we had to take it from a flat piece of wrought iron and beat it into a tube instead. And so it starts out as this, and then we cup it like this, and then we end up getting it to where it touches each other, and then we flux it, and then we bring it up to like a white hot. So it's a fusing point. It's actually between your white hot and your burning the iron part. There's a fine line between them. So you have to be really careful when you bring it up to welding heat, because you can actually burn the iron and then you've ruined it. And so, yeah, so then you forge weld it together. Every time you roll it like this and you're forge welding it, your apprentice or whoever's helping you, he'll be shoving a screw in here, and it helps keep a little hole open the entire time that he's beating on it, so that way that hole doesn't close up. After you have after you have the tube formed, we bring it here, and that's where we ream it out. We have to ream it one reamer at a time until we've achieved the bore size we're looking for. It takes about 4 days of constant cranking to ream one out. Yeah.
So on your custom jobs, how much time does it take from start to finish on one piece?
The best that we can guess for us is roughly around 400 hours is involved in an entire rifle. Yeah. In the 18th
Is that
century,
one guy or like more than one guy?
that's all of us working on it. Yeah. In the 18th century, it would have went a lot quicker because like I said, they're working daylight to dark 6 days a week for one, and two, they're not getting paid by the hour; they're getting paid by their productivity, and so they get paid by how much they get done by the day. And so, if you're just standing around not getting much done, you didn't make nothing. Yeah. So yeah, yeah. So that made it work. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. Oh my gosh, but farming definitely would have been the worst of all of them, because you're out there in the sunlight all day long, and then at night when you're done farming for the day, you just go home to a hot house and your air conditioning's open in the window, you know. So
You should have just had night farming.
yeah, yeah. So pretty good. So
Well,
you
that's
guys are welcome to
fascinating.
pick any of this up and hold it, look at it. If you have any questions, ask away. While you're here, I don't know if Richard's out there. I think he might be, but we have a smith shop out there too.
Like we were using it this morning and sat it long enough to make it want to go out. But there in front of you are the steps in how gun barrels made, and we finished cupping this scalp this morning. We welded into a tube. The gun barrel starts as a flat bar and gets welded into a tube.
So how is what you're doing different from like what I saw at the blacksmiths? Is it just a different product that you're creating?
We make guns,
Okay.
and they hammer black metal.
Okay.
There's the difference. They're material specific. We are product specific. So they work one material. We work different materials to make one thing. Smith part's the same. The black metal parts of a gun are shaped by hammering. But gunsmiths also have to be able to melt and pour brass and or silver. The only people in a town this size who pour brass are gunsmiths. And they usually advertise as such. They're gunsmiths and brass founders is usually what you see in their ads. So, on lock, stock, and barrel, that's a literal truth here. You gotta
Interesting.
be able to make the whole gun lock, stock, and barrel, or you couldn't do repair work.
Well, that's a wrap for this Colonial Williamsburg video. I hope you really enjoyed it, getting to see another part of this amazing living history museum. If you like this sort of stuff, check out my other videos. Check out colonialwilliamsburg.org to plan your own visit here, because it's so much cooler in real life than it is on film. Till next time, this is History Buff, TN Photobug signing out, and I'm having a blast with the past.